Tickets, please! Ben Aitken makes a welcome return to the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival now, as he takes Paul Blezard on the Gran Tour.
Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival 2021, the limited edition, digital edition, brought to you live through the magic of Tinternet, because Olympia won't let us in for obvious reasons. Today, I have been so looking forward to this event because we're talking about a book that I have adored by a writer I absolutely admire. Ben Aitken has described himself in the past as a freelance critic, playwright, and goldfish. He also describes himself in the back of his latest book as born under Thatcher, grew to 6 feet, then stopped, and is an Aquarius. He's the author of Dear Bill Bryson, Footnotes from a Small Island, published in 2015, and A Chip Shop in Poznan, My Unlikely Year in Poland, published in 2019. He also writes he has 4 grandparents in working condition and couldn't be happier about the fact. The grandparent reference is relevant to the book we're going to write. There are a few cover blurbs on Ben's, other than The Spectator writes, both moving and hilarious, and the Daily Mail Book of the Week says, a tale of gloriously eccentric British pensioners. Boy, can he write. For his latest book, entitled The Gran Tour, which we will discuss. But just before I come to that, he has a fantastic website called benaitken.com, where a lovely lady called Emma, I assume she's lovely, writes from Spain saying, thank you for writing well, Ben. I read A Chip Shop in Poznan immediately after rereading my favourite titles by Clive James. A tough act to follow, in my humble opinion. I was thoroughly surprised and equally cheery to find that your book is great, and I shall try to read the rest as soon as possible. I hope you can keep going and stay interesting, and creative. Thank you, muchas gracias, Emma. If you want a finer review than that, I think you'll be hard pushed. From a reader, someone that bought and paid for it. Ben Aitken, it's a great pleasure to say a very warm welcome to the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival 2021. How are you? Where are you? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thank you. I should mention that my pseudonym is Emma from Staines. So, yes. Yeah, I think I wrote that review quite well.
I think you're the last person on earth to do what used to be called, it was a big thing some years ago, glove puppeting, whereby you write reviews on your own Amazon book site as if you were somebody else, but you're writing them for yourself. I don't see you being that naughty.
Although it's tempting sometimes to reply to reviews when you feel like you've been dragged across the coals unfairly, you are tempted to just reply and say, I don't know, let's meet up at the park, socially distanced, and talk this through a bit. But no, you have to sort of resist that temptation, because at the end of the day, one person's treasure is another person's soggy tea bag, and if it wasn't like that, the world and culture would be quite boring, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think you're right to not succumb to that temptation. Can we start at the beginning with the Gran Tour? We'll make reference to Chip Shop in Poznan later on, because I thoroughly enjoyed that book and remain a huge fan of it. The subtitle for this is Travels with My Elders. I have a feeling that you said that when you could enjoy a 4-night holiday, including 4 3-course dinners, 4 cooked breakfasts, 4 games of bingo, a pair of excursions, 16 pints of lager, return coach travel, and the uninterrupted company of people of pensionable age, all for £100, you thought, that's for me. Is that the truth? Is that what happened?
No, that is 100% the truth. I'm a sucker for a bargain. Absolutely. And I'm fond of traveling in the UK. I like to have a look what's on my doorstep, what's under my nose, notwithstanding my trip to Poland and other trips abroad. But I think you can gain a lot and be rewarded quite sufficiently by traveling in the UK. And I was encouraged and excited at the prospect of spending some time with my elders. I hoped that by rubbing shoulders with them, something might fall off and land on me, a bit of wisdom or a bit of serenity, something like that. So the motivation was 2 or 3-fold.
There's a lot less fixodent in this than I was imagining there might be, I have to say.
Yeah, I think they can't get that anymore since the Brexit, hoo-ha, stuck on the continent somewhere. So let's hope they're coping.
I'm not sure whether the chronology of the book is the chronology of the actual travel, but let's start with the first trip. Tell us about planning, itinerary, and what you expected from the first trip, which took you to Scarborough.
I didn't expect much, to be honest. I was quite open to the idea of it being really boring and glum and dreary and me wanting to turn around at Derby. But in the event, it wasn't like that at all. I was nervous on that first trip to Scarborough, and the book is in chronological order. So the first trip was a baptism of fire by heading up to North Yorkshire in the middle of winter on a coach, surrounded by 30 or 40 people, twice or thrice my age. And I was apprehensive because I was worried that I might be sort of pushed to the margins or met with suspicion or hostility even. One or two did suspect me of being an undercover Guardian journalist or something like that. But for the most part, people were curious and friendly, and it wasn't long before we were having a chat over a pint of lager and playing the bingo, and I was sort of in the swing of things. And by the second and third, fourth trips to Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Italy, I felt comfortable and I didn't feel out of place. It felt quite normal to be amongst my elders and on these sort of budget coach holidays. And no, I thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing. I can't say I learned a great amount. I'm actually asking Shearings for my money back on that front. But no, I kid. There's lots more grist in the mill now. It's difficult to know exactly how one has been educated or what wisdom one has sort of, downloaded. But there's definitely more grist in the mill. We might get onto that a bit later. Certain characters that were influential or gave me food for thought.
Coach, I've not done coach trips. My last time on a coach was, as a student going around Europe, and then school buses and stuff like that. So let's start from scratch. There is a politics of where you sit on a coach, where you get on. And of course, the nature of any long coach trip is often formed or founded upon the personality of the driver, especially if that driver has access to a microphone and a public address system. How did that work?
The drivers are cut from a different piece of cloth. They really are. I loved them to a man and a woman. The first chap was Roger, who took me up to Scarborough, and within 25 minutes of pulling out of Portsmouth, so to say, he'd offered a brilliant one-liner. He said, "It's a small group today, ladies and gents, average height 5'4". And that sort of set the tone for what was to come. And I was very pleased with what came. There really are quite rounded figures in several senses. They will inform you about the passing scenery. They will tell you what happened at this or that castle. Which person had experienced cardiac arrest at this services, and a few jokes as well. And they're also providing that very important role of shuffling you from A to B and then back to C and D and E and F, because it's not just a case of once you're there, they go off. They're with you for the week, and they'll take you up to York and Whitby or into Snowdonia. So that's one lovely thing about a coach holiday, is that the mode of moving sort of stays with you for the duration and adds further to the holiday throughout the week in a way that an aeroplane or a train simply can't do, really. But the drivers, no, they were great value. There was Frank, who took me to Ireland. He was a terrific chap. There was Roger, who ran me up to Scarborough. They were all great, and it really is an ambition of mine, once my sort of writing career flounders spectacularly, which is due to happen probably next year, I'm going to see if I can get a job driving a coach for holidays. I think I will be out of my depth massively. I'm going to have to learn a lot before I even, submit the application form, but I would love to do it. I think they are some of the happiest people on the planet.
Can you drive?
Only a moped.
Well, then you have an interesting career path ahead of you of getting your driving license and then your passenger service vehicle license and all that sort of stuff. Talk to us about the politics of where to sit, especially as the youngest member of the group, when you are joining excitable 80, 60, 70 and 80-year-olds looking forward to a 4-day, 5-day trip.
I suppose when I went up to Scarborough the first trip, I was in some ways quite prescient and social distance quite significantly. I put myself right at the back, away from anybody else, and that was mostly because I was a little bit apprehensive. But it wasn't long before I moved forward row by row, and then as a matter of course, I was plonking myself right in the thick of it, because that's where the action is, that's where the chat is. That's where the crosswords are being done and the sandwiches are being shared and the boiled sweets are being dropped and stuff like that. So yeah, there is some politics to it, but it's a very navigable and manageable set of politics, and it's not too scary really. You just need to kind of understand that everyone's there to have a good time and not to be too mean or menacing or whatever. And yeah, it was terrific.
Your first trip, you were largely I think the only single person in a group of people who were largely couples or groups of friends, and obviously so much younger. How did that work? And what this book points out very poignantly, I find, is that we now live in sort of not only sort of political silos and morality silos, but also age silos. And of course, the current terms are cohort and peer group and so on. And we tend not to do as much transgenerational conversational traffic, emotional traffic as we used to. We're used to, spending time with people in or about our own age. Although, of course, COVID has meant more people are locked down with an elderly parent or relative, perhaps than before when you started writing this book. But how did that work? Were you apprehensive about how you'd be received? Were you worried that you might be seen as someone that was much younger and therefore might spoil the fun of the others, or that they would spoil your fun?
No, I was a little bit apprehensive because it is unusual, but I had a sort of conviction, if I can be so bold as to call it that I stood to gain by crossing that sort of generational gap, because people that have lived longer have seen more, they've done more, they've experienced more. There's more fat to chew on, basically. When I'm with my contemporaries, yeah, it's comfortable, it's cozy, it's nice. We've got too much in common, and I really did feel that the less you have in common, the more ground you've got to cover. That was one of my sort of animating principles, and so it proved. I enjoyed learning, what bread and dripping actually was. I thought it was some kind of fancy French pudding, but no, it's basically mopping up the fat left over from a Sunday roast with a bit of bread. And I enjoyed learning about life in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and my friends, even if they tried very hard, they couldn't tell me what it was like to grow up in the 60s or the 50s. So I did enjoy that discrepancy, and I really think as a matter of policy, and systematically, it should be encouraged and supported and endorsed. I'm not sure exactly how you would do that, other than maybe having a sort of national service in which relative youngsters are placed with their elders, for 2 or 3 weeks. So you might have to drag them there kicking and screaming, but I think they would come out of the process and the experience a little bit, I don't know, better off anyway. So, and I think the current situation is gonna, I'm not sure what you think, Paul. Is it going to worsen the situation, re intergenerational relations, or is it going to improve it? Because we're being asked to protect and shield and cherish our elders in a way that we aren't usually being told to, but we're also being told to keep our distance from them. And I don't need to tell you that when you're walking down the street now, people will give you a very wide berth. And I just hope that isn't a legacy of the pandemic, isn't that we are far more wary and reluctant to sort of cross those generational bridges for fear of being infected or what have you. We'll have to see. But I'm a complete convert to the notion of spending time with people that aren't like you, whether that's people of a different age, people of a different religion, people of a different approach to life, a different race, whatever. I think you stand to gain a lot by spending time with people that are unlike you, as well as like you, because it's good to have mates that have similar interests and whatnot. But there's enough of them out there, people like us. So
yep, I wholeheartedly agree. So your first hotel night, the Norbrek, if memory serves, the Norbrek in Scarborough. Talk us through how it works. I assume you get there, you check in, you get to your room, you figure yourself out. And then, of course, comes the first dinner. When you are all at dinner, how does the seating work? Who do you sit next to? Are you placed by a maitre d' or a waitress, or do you get to choose to sit next to the new pals that you've made on the coach?
You don't actually get much say in the matter when it comes to where you're sitting in the dining room. And the dining room is a crucial environment on these holidays. A lot of the action goes on in the dining room and the adjoining bar, which is where the stage usually is, and the bingo caller was set up, and the crooner will sing you a few songs, and the comedian tell a few jokes and whatnot. But the first trip to Scarborough, I was put on table 13 with a chap called Alan, who was also traveling on his own. If you're a couple, you'll probably be given a nice window table or something like that, or put with another couple to sort of to bond and mingle. But if you're traveling alone, they'll try and group you together on a table. And so it was just me and Alan from Birmingham, who was 82 and just fancied seeing some of the country. You know, he spent just about all of his life in Warwickshire, and you know, he thought Wolverhampton was sort of the edge of the planet, but here he was in his 80s taking advantage of these coach holidays and having a look at other parts of the UK. And so, yeah, I'm not going to lie, it was an awkward first course, actually. That first starter on that first evening with a man that I didn't know from Adam, and you know, he was looking at me thinking, you know, is this chap lost? You know, what's he doing here? But you know, I suppose I was really curious to get to know Alan, and so we had a good old chat about his school years and his work in an iron foundry, and then how he met his wife at the age of 50. He was working in a pub pulling pints, and she was working in the kitchen, you know, doing the dishes. And I asked him, you know, how he fell in love, and he said it just sort of happened. And I said, it didn't just sort of happen, Alan, son. You know, how did you fall in love? And he said, well, I used to just run into the kitchen and give her the order and then dash out. And then I just started taking longer to do it. And that was how it happened. And I thought that was a nice, succinct and quite ordinary description of how, you know, the start of a loving relationship can sort of unfold. And the food was questionable on occasions. You know, there was a chicken Kiev that I had to send back. But no, the dining room was a memorable and an excellent place throughout the Gran Tour, which is the name of the book.
I seem to remember Alan coming up with a fantastic line of working in a foundry with all that hot molten metal and telling a colleague who was complaining about the heat and the hard work and the tiredness, he said, it's all right, it's only till you die, which I thought was just rather wonderful. You mentioned the B word earlier on, bingo. For those that are unfamiliar, tell us what bingo is, how it works, and then we'll talk about how important it is on trips such as this to a certain generation, and actually, as we learn through the book, to all generations, including your other half, sorry.
I assume you're referring to bingo, the recreational activity, rather than bingo, the city in Burkina Faso, because I got confused when they said that we're going through to the bingo. But it's a great game. I'm absolutely a paid up advocate, patron of all things to do with bingo now. I go twice a week, well, I did, but when I could. It's mindful. That's what I like about it. You know, these youngsters that are doing hot yoga and listening to, mindful podcasts and things like that, I think they're missing their trick. They want to get into bingo big time because it focuses the mind just enough to stop one's brain indulging in those kind of pet sort of neuroses and concerns, but it gives you enough freedom and sort of and flexibility to have a word with your neighbour and have a bit of fun as well. And there's always the chance of winning 50 odd quid, and you can't practice bingo, you can't get better, so there's no strain on you, there's no obligation to improve, you just turn up and your chances are the same. So I loved that it was a steady fixture on these holidays. About 7 o'clock, without fail, you'd go through after you've had your dinner and play 3 games of bingo, and actually won on the first night in Scarborough. I won the full house. I won 60 odd quid, and when I went up to collect my winnings, somebody tried to trip me up with their cane, which was a bit impolite. But he was only teasing, bless him. But no, I made sure not to win the second night, though.
How can you make sure not to win? I mean, I like the fact that there's a wonderful few pages that you write about the first bingo, about the politics that pertain, about the joy of winning being somewhat tempered by the, oh my God, is everybody going to hate me now? What happens if I win again? How do you not ensure that you do it? I suppose if your number's called out and you've got it on your card, you just don't fill it in, or?
Yeah, you just sort of sabotage your ticket. You spoil your ballot. So even if you're in the running and you've had a few numbers in a row, that you just sort of tune out for a few minutes to make sure that you're not going to win again. Because if I won 2 nights in a row, I think they actually would have thrown me into the North Sea quite happily.
You had some, while we're on the politics of bingo, you as an act of kindness, you gave a lady a bingo ticket, a bingo card that you had purchased. Talk us through that experience and how it turned out.
This was still in Scarborough, so it was quite a momentous 4 days, to be honest. I think it was the second or third night. Got chatting to a couple from Rhyl in North Wales. I've almost certainly pronounced that incorrectly, but yes, they were from North Wales, and she was less mobile than she used to be, let's put it that way. So I said, I'll dash up and get your bingo ticket from reception, don't worry. And so I offered one of the 2 tickets that I'd bought. Her husband didn't play, never plays at all. And she, couldn't decide which to take, and she was umming and ahhing, took one and then eventually gave it back and took the other. Tried to give me the £3, but I said, oh, don't worry about it, no problem. And she went on to win the bingo that night, 65 odd quid it was. And I didn't even get a thank you. Not even, do you want a drink? Do you want a vodka and orange juice? Something like that. And I thought, you know what? Legally, that's my ticket. I own it. I could be a bit pedantic about this. But I let it be. And I hope at the very least that night when she was up in bed next to her husband, she, had a moment's reflection and turned around to her husband and said, oh, do you know what, Jim? I didn't say thank you to that young man. I'm not sure where her accent's from. That's my generic, not from Portsmouth accent. But bingo was a highlight of the Gran Tour. And as I said, I continued to play in Portsmouth after the coach holidays. And I'm praying for its return, really. And Paul, if you ever fancy a game, I can come up to London and we can find another hall in Cricklewood or something.
I'm not in London. I'm currently locked down in rural Warwickshire, shielding my 81-year-old dad. But I'm up for a game of bingo. And to listeners who may be tuning in from Rhyl in Wales, that was not an attempt at a Welsh accent by Ben. Don't worry, he wasn't even trying. Let's come to another trip. You decide, having done solo to Scarborough, you then decided to go with your nan on a trip.
Yeah, that's right. I always wanted to take Nan on one trip, not more than one, because I don't think she'd want to, suffer me for that much time. But we went off to Wales together for 4 nights. The same sort of setup. You pay about 150 quid a head. You get 4 nights. You get a 3-course dinner each night, a game of bingo, excursions to Snowdonia and Anglesey. Great value. And Nan had a great time. She was very skeptical and dubious about the whole thing. She thought, coach trips weren't really for her. Didn't think she was going to enjoy it. In the event, absolutely had a hoot and knew just about everybody in the hotel and on the holiday by the end of it. And that's something worth underlining and stressing, is that these are very sociable holidays in a way that I wasn't accustomed to or used to. I think travel in many ways has become more and more privatized and individual. And I've got friends, and when they go on holiday, they want to stay in hotels. They want to keep to themselves. The communal element of travel and holidaying is fallen out of fashion, I think, is the best way to maybe describe it. And I loved that social and communal aspect of the holiday in Wales, and so did my nan. And we had a great time. And by the end of the week, we really had got to know each other in a different fashion. And somebody asked me what my highlight of the week was in Wales, and I quite honestly said it was my nan. And this person who asked me, I think her name was Leslie, she started laughing. I said, "Why are you laughing?" And she said, "Well, I asked your nan the same question, what her highlight was." And I said, "Yeah." And Leslie said, "Well," and she said it was the jam roly-poly. So I wasn't best pleased with that, that my nan ranks a jam roly-poly over and above me, but never mind. She's a sweetheart.
We learned a lot about your nan, not least when you walk into her room and she says, "I can't find my teeth. Can you see my glasses?" when you've gone to look for toothpaste. And the fantastic revelation of her joining and then leaving the church and the reasons therein. I got a very strong picture of your nan being quite a strong character.
Yeah, she certainly is a strong character. The incident you refer to, she had a roll in the hay out of wedlock, I suppose we could say, and got pregnant with my uncle. And the local vicar at her church, when he married the couple 6 months before he gave birth to my uncle, he basically did the maths and asked my nan, my uncle was quite significantly premature. And my nan didn't like the kind of what he was getting at and said, no, he was 2 weeks late, actually. And she was kicked out of the church, and she's not been back inside one since, bless her. But she still has, her own faith and her own sort of understanding of, how the world works and whatnot. And yeah, she's a strong character. She's got, lines in the sand, and if you cross those, she makes sure that you know about it, and that can feel quite bruising and rough at the time, but you benefit from having someone that wants to instill certain values and principles in you. And I thank her for that, although I didn't thank her at the time, that's for sure. And I still get into her bad books even now. I missed her birthday yesterday even. I mean, I did send a present down in advance, and she opened it 3 days early. It was a book about the repair shop, the BBC show. She likes that. But I forgot to call on the birthday itself, and that was it. I'm in the bad books for 2 weeks.
Tell us about the trip you took your girlfriend on, Megan, and how that dynamic changed being a young couple in a group of older couples or not couples.
Okay, so of the 6 trips I went on, the 6 coach holidays, I took one with my nan and one with my girlfriend, and the other 4 were on my own. I wanted to take Megan because that's my girlfriend, because I thought it might be interesting to sort of compare ourselves or weigh ourselves up against more established couples to see if, almost like an extended counselling or therapy session, to see what their tricks were, how to achieve longevity, keep things interesting in the sack and so on. And no, we had a great fun. And my Megan, she's late 20s, but she's really a Victorian at heart. Her idea of a perfect night in is probably listening to a Virginia Woolf adaptation on the radio and eating a suet pudding or something like that. And she had a great time as well. And we went down to St Ives in Cornwall, and that was a terrific place. And went to the Barbara Hepworth studio and gallery, and went to the Tate, and again there was bingo, and there was some brilliant comedians down in St Ives. I told a joke that stayed with me, if you'd like to hear it. Involved lobster, and she said, the Coast Guard phoned me the other day. They said, sorry Sheila, but we found your mother-in-law washed up down at the beach. She's got 4 lobsters hanging off her. We don't know what to do, to be honest. And so I said to the Coast Guard, I said, well, how about 2 each? No, it's not 2 Ronnies, but it did a job on me, and it tickled the room. And, I think it's so easy to have a good time on these holidays. That's what I realised. And I really appreciated, the gaiety and the levity of these holidays. And that was something really quite sweet.
There is also what comes shining through, and that you are so respectful and admiring of, is the quiet wisdom that you are party to from the people that you are with. And in fact, on the St Ives trip, amidst all the galleries and the art and the very nice pieces of writing on the St Ives School and the glory of the light and all that sort of stuff, there's a fellow called Kieran who has lived with me since I've read this book. Talk us through Kieran and his words of wisdom to you.
Oh, Kieran, yeah, one of a pair, Kieran and Imelda. Kieran was from Ireland and still is from Ireland, I believe, and Imelda's from London, and they met at a disco in Cricklewood probably in the late 50s, early 60s, or something like that. And they, it's difficult to conjure Kieran. I mean, I try on the page, and it's probably easier on the page than in the flesh. But he was an enormous fella, about 7 foot and probably 240 kilograms or something like that. But the sweetest, softest chap, and he kept on, he kept on getting things wrong and being told off by Imelda. But he was full of stories and full of grisly wisdom and things like that. And he took me and Megan under his wing, and one evening was quite funny because he did all the drinking for the pair of them, and Imelda stuck to orange juice. And one evening I said to Imelda, as we were kind of heading back to our bedrooms, do you ever drink, Imelda? And before she could answer, Kieran got in there and said, we can't afford for the both of us. And he's a Brummie as well, even though he's from Ireland. But no, he was a funny chap, and to look at, you'd probably give him a wide berth walking down the street because you'd be terrified. But it's really, can't judge a book by its cover because it's one of the softest, kindest, most charming people I've ever met.
There's a lovely piece here where he says, I've loved Imelda every minute since I met her. Not so much as a tea break. Believe me, some minutes were longer than others. It's imperative that you open the contents of your minds, the two of you. And if you really want my advice, sure, you're better off without it. He sounds like a hell of a character. Sorry, I've just read a piece of your book, How Rude I Am. Ben, would you do us? You very kindly agreed to read an extract for us. Would you like to talk us into it and read, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I've got a different version of the book to you. This is the smaller, less expensive version that's coming out in April. So if you fancy that, get involved.
That's the one you're publishing. Your publishers sent me.
Yeah, get both. Why not? Read them simultaneously if you can. That would be interesting. So this reading's from the trip to Italy. I went to Lake Como. That was an ordeal because 27 hours on a coach. That is tough. And I was next to a lady called Jill from Shropshire, who, if she wasn't talking, was snoring, one of the two. And she was a real character, a real dynamo, and we became good friends over the course of the holiday. And on one afternoon, we were taken out on an excursion, and we did a lap of the lake, and we pulled up outside George Clooney's house. So I'm just going to read a little bit from there, okay? On our way back to the hotel, we stop outside George Clooney's house. Jill is visibly and audibly excited. She even has a puff on her inhaler. And she's not alone in her excitement. The sight of Clooney's house has the entire coach spellbound, even the blokes. They're using their cameras to zoom in. Someone thinks the kitchen window's open. Someone can see a massive pepper grinder. Someone thinks they saw him through frosted glass, which means he was probably getting out of the shower. The very thought does something to Jill. I watch her inch closer to George's perimeter. I watch her look over her shoulder to make sure a few people are looking. And then I watch her remove her bra from under her blouse and fling it over the wall into George's garden. I ask her what she did that for. She shrugs her shoulders and says, well, I've plenty of others. A mile or so down the road, with Jill's knockers bouncing around like there's no tomorrow, I ask if she's got a bit of a thing for George then. She says not really. She says that if she's got a thing for anyone, then it's David Dimbleby. She even went to the filming of Question Time when it was in Telford, and again when it was in Shrewsbury. She was tempted to ask David a question. I asked what she would have asked. I don't know, she says. Maybe if he fancied 9 holes sometime. David, if you're reading or listening, you'd have been a fool to say no.
Wonderful. I have to ask, is Jill her real name, or have you changed names to protect the innocent/guilty?
They didn't need protecting. I'm celebrating them. Jill is definitely their name.
What was the difference, the fundamental difference between a sort of domestic coach tour and a longer international one? Because that has a very different dynamic to it, I would imagine.
What was the difference? Just the extent of the outward and inward journeys on the coach. You know, I'm a light sleeper. I struggle. I've never been able to sleep sat up. You know, I have to be horizontal. You know, you can put me on an ironing board or wherever and I'll be okay, but in a chair, no, I can't do it. So it was just a bit of a purgatory, that whole excursion from London down to North Italy. But once in situ, once in Lake Como, it was sort of, you know, the usual drill, really. You know, big, you know, long 3-course dinners, chatting with people, and then excursions we went up to San Moritz, you know, and we went to Milan, and again, there was no bingo, I must say. You know, obviously the Italians haven't imported or embraced bingo yet. It will happen, inevitably, but not yet. So there wasn't bingo, but there was a sort of pianist and a singer and stuff like that. So the trip followed much the same pattern as the others, which I was pleased to see. Yeah, it was a fantastic time, and that was the penultimate trip. And the last one was to Pitlochry in Scotland. And I went up there. This was June now, so I started in winter, and the last trip was in the middle of June. And I remember on my final evening going to the theatre and on the way back to the hotel, crossing a bridge. And it was about 11 o'clock in the evening. And yet it was still, you know, almost perfectly light. And, you know, I had the reflection at that point, you know, that there's so much light so late in the day, and you know the idea sort of resonated with me on several levels. And because I used to be a bit scared of aging, to be honest, growing up, getting a bit older. I had a Peter Pan complex. So I think I was 29 for about 4 years. But one of the dividends that the book and the journeys therein has paid me is, you know, I'm no longer fearful of growing up and aging. It seems to me, you know, notwithstanding some complications, it seems to me to be quite a joyous stage of life, actually. I think you've learned a few things and you've got a massive amount of perspective. You don't have some of the ordinary quotidian strains of earning a living and raising a family. It appears to me that it can be an enviable and desirable stage of life, and that fills me with some confidence and some peace of mind, actually.
There's something resoundingly hopeful about this. Yes, you're in Pitlochry. You've gone to see, was it Blythe Spirit, if memory serves? And there's that marvellous scene that you say, where you quote Neil Young when you're coming back over the bridge. You'd imagine if it was a film, you'd hear Neil Young, I'm quoting now, come a little bit closer, hear what I have to say. It's a lovely end to it. It's a beautiful book. Can we talk a little bit about travel writing in general and what you think? This is, of course, the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival 2021. I was going through your blog on your website when you were residing at Shakespeare and Company. You talk about traveling around Europe, and you write so beautifully there. I wondered what insights you can give people listening in who might think, well, we're locked down, there's not a lot of traveling going on at the minute, but how if one were to write perhaps a travel blog of walking through the fields of Warwickshire, or, you know, walking through Snowdonia, what do you think travel writing needs to do to be able to sort of meet a standard required of contemporary travel writing, of which, of course, you're one of the new and great exponents now?
That's a tricky question, isn't it? The honest answer is I haven't got a clue. I haven't got a clue. I don't often think, perhaps I should, but I don't often think in those more sort of macro kind of terms about the genre and the practice of. It's really quite instinctive with me. I've got a taste for something, a journey, a trip, an experience. I'll go on it and I'll just be all eyes, all ears and all fingers when it comes to the writing down of that experience, the translation of that experience. I don't even read much travel writing myself, to be honest. I prefer to read novels or non-fiction which has something to do with politics and, Brexit or Thatcherism. I don't mean to kind of belittle the genre. I think it can be fantastic. I love Laurie Lee's I Stepped Out One Summer's Morning. That's a beautiful book, and it would kind of flourish and deserve to be on any shelf in the bookshop, not just the travel writing section. Same can be said of the work of J.B. Priestley, Jan Morris, Palin, Paul Theroux. It can be a gorgeous way of writing because it contains so much. It can have a little bit of sociology, a bit of philosophy, a bit of poetry, and some drama and some suspense and some romance. Nothing's off the cards when it comes to writing travel, and perhaps that's the thing that I could reiterate when it comes to approaching a piece of travel writing, that nothing is off the cards. You could write eloquently and brilliantly and captivatingly about your morning routine, boiling the kettle, making the instant coffee, buttering the toast, flicking through the Times. For me, that is as much travel writing. It's that attention to detail. It's that degree of focus on not ordinary life, but life. And you don't need to be in Dubai or Bermuda or even Berkshire. You can be in your own bedroom and still be thinking in a kind of creative and analytical way. And then it's about the real task is in the telling. The task is in the telling. It's in that translation of your feeling and your sensitivity and your impressions and putting that down on a page in a way which isn't soporific or boring or whatever. It's hard. It is hard. And I feel really lucky that enough readers feel that how I'm doing it is okay, is all right. And that's given the publisher confidence in me. I don't know. There's no secret recipe to doing it well, I don't think. You've just got to pursue your instincts and then work hard on the writing and make sure it's as good as you could possibly make it, according to you, not according to how Bill Bryson does it or how Manisha Rajesh does it or whatever. It's according to you, and then just hope for the best. And don't be disheartened if the publisher or the agent rejects you, because it's not a judgment on the quality of your work. It's a judgment of whether they think they can sell it at the moment, whether they can sell it into bookshops, whether the agent can sell it to a publisher. It's not a reflection on the quality and the merit of the actual writing. So don't be disheartened, go forth and self-publish. Why not? The means are there now more than they ever were. And I think we're all travelers. It's just where we go, I suppose, and some jot it all down and have a willingness to share.
I think you just answered the question incredibly insightfully and very lucidly, because at the core of it is, it doesn't matter where you are, but be in the place that you're in. And if you're going to write about it, think about how it makes you feel. What are you seeing? Once you've established the scene, what are you seeing? How does it make you feel? How does it make you think? Which is what you do. And it doesn't matter, as you say, whether you're writing about walking from the bedroom to the bathroom or from the Karakorums into Afghanistan. It really doesn't matter. There was another question I was going to ask you. Yes, what was it? So did you actually sleep in Shakespeare and Company? Were you one of the residents there for a while? Shakespeare and Company, for those of you that may not know, of course, is a very famous Parisian bookstore.
Yeah, I was. I stayed there for 5 months. They have a scheme, I suppose you'd call it, called Tumbleweeding, which was set up by the George Whitman, who was the owner of the shop for about 60 years, I think. And he had a big heart and a relatively big bookshop. And so people that were just traveling through Tumbleweed, he would encourage and permit to sleep in the shop on the floor next to the science fiction shelves or the poetry shelves in return for doing a couple of hours work a day. And this sort of scheme prevails. And I was in Paris on Valentine's Day a few years ago. I was meant to be with my girlfriend, but she dumped me the day before. Anyway, so I got chatting to the bookseller at Shakespeare and Company, and he mentioned this scheme, Tumbleweeding, and I said I was working on a book. This was my first book, Dear Bill Bryson, Footnotes from a Small Island, in which I very unoriginally pursue Bill Bryson around the country. And he said, yeah, you can stay here. You can sleep on the floor and do some writing, shelve some books. And I was there for 5 months, and it was absolutely brilliant, so formative. Extended me in several ways, intellectually, but also physically, because I ate so many croissants and ate so much cheese and whatnot. And it was a brilliant time. And I encourage any aspiring writers or writers, get yourselves down there, knock on the door, not at the moment because they're probably not admitting any customers, but when you can, get down to Shakespeare and Company. And there's a sort of sister shop in Madrid called Desperate Literature, and there's one in Valencia called La Batisfera, which are two great international bookshops. And I think if you speak to the owners, who are sort of alumni from Shakespeare and Company, they might let you sleep in their shops as well. And yeah, go forth, do that. You should do it yourself, Paul.
I've done similar, but I haven't done that. Good advice, really good advice. And of course, if you're sleeping in a bookshop, you are not short of bedtime reading. What are you working on now, Ben, if I might ask? Having tracked you from Bryson to Poznan and now through the Grand Tour, I'm fascinated to know what you're working on now, insofar as you are able or willing to tell us.
I'm working on an anthology of epic romantic poetry about the women I met on the Grand Tour. No, I'm working on another piece of non-fiction along similar lines. It's happened accidentally. I moved in with a lady in her 80s 3 months ago, just before lockdown 2.0, part of a concept called home share. So basically they match someone relatively young with someone relatively old, and you help out, and the rent's affordable. So my new housemate is 84, and it's a funny time to start living with somebody new, let alone somebody who's that much older than you. We've had the whole lockdown together, basically. So I just started writing a diary, keeping a journal about that experience and that evolving and complicated friendship. And I mentioned it to my publisher, and they said that sounds like it could be interesting, keep writing that. And then I sent them a chunk of the diary, and they said there's definitely something in this, because this is an unlikely friendship, and it offers echoes of the Grand Tour. And
it sounds wonderful. Funny enough, I've considered the same thing in the past myself when I've been sort of homeless and sleeping on park benches, and unfortunately didn't find the right thing. But I'm rather envious of you doing it. Can I mean, twixt you and I and the rest of the Edward Stanford Travel Writing Festival, is it working well? It sounds like the recipe for a marvelous experience. If you as long as you get on with the person in whose home you are living.
Yeah, that's right. It's the getting on that takes some doing. Her name's Wendy. She's an absolute gem, but she's got her ways of doing things, and being able to anticipate what they are, and then conforming and getting things right is, it's not always easy. But she's taught me a few things already. To heat the red wine in the oven with the plates, for example. That's one, and to basically keep everything you possibly can for as long as possible. There's potatoes in the back of the fridge that I think are from the sort of interwar period.
Waste not, want not, Ben Aitken. Waste not, want not. Ben, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you. Such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and for coming to join us. Congratulations on the Grand Tour, which I hope is doing extremely well. It is a superb piece of writing, peppered with beautiful characters, wonderful observations. And I kid you not when I say there have been moments when I've reread a page 3 or 4 times just to have the same laugh or the same prickle in the back of my throat or prickle in the back of my eye. It's a wonderful piece of writing, Ben, and I'm loving tracking your career. You're a damn fine writer. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming to listen to us. If you have been to the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival 2021, the special digital edition, because Olympia won't let us in for obvious reasons. Ben Aitken, from all of us at Edward Stanford's, thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate your interest in the book, and I wish you and your father well.
I once sat on a coach by a broken WC and can confirm that's not the spot you want. Whereas Lake Como, I've always wanted to visit, even with the risk of falling missiles. Thank you, Ben and Paul. The Gran Tour, Travels with My Elders by Ben Aitken, is available to buy at stanfords.co.uk, as are Ben's previous books, Chip Shop in Poznan and Dear Bill Bryson, Footnotes from a Small Island. Because maps and travel books are what Stanfords have been doing since 1853.